You really thought someone like me would stay loyal to someone like you?
Now get out of my house and never come back! We are done for good!
We are done for good. He quickly grabbed her suitcase and threw it into the street like she was already forgotten. No home. No savings. And no one was waiting for her either. Just silence. And an old envelope she'd never opened. Hours later, desperate and shaking, she slid her late grandfather's dusty bank card across a teller's counter, expecting nothing. Instead, the screen flashed red. The alarms went quiet and the entire bank froze. Employees whispered her grandfather's name like it was forbidden. And then the manager stepped back, his hands trembling, and said, "Ma'am, the CEO wants to see you immediately." In one moment, the woman thrown out like trash became the woman the bank stood up for. Before we continue, can I ask you something? Where in the world are you watching from right now? Drop your location in the comments. We love seeing how far these stories travel. And don't forget to like and subscribe to get fully immersed. Because if stories about betrayal, hidden power, and justice that arrives right on time pull you in, then you don't want to miss this one. The first thing she heard was the sound of glass clinking right behind her in a soft and careless manner that came from people who were already celebrating something she hadn't been invited into. You really thought someone like me would stay loyal to someone like you? Get out of my house right now. And never come back. We are done for good. The words hit before she fully processed the movement in front of her. One moment, she was standing in the doorway of the house she'd cleaned, cooked in, and sacrificed for. The next, her suitcase slid across the floor and bumped against her ankle, pushed there by the same man who had once promised she'd never face the world alone. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look angry. That was what hurt the most. She stood there, fingers curling instinctively around the strap of her worn handbag, blinking as if blinking hard enough might rearrange reality into something familiar again. "Mark," she said, her voice barely steady. "Please. We can talk about this." He checked his watch, annoyed, as though she were holding him up from something important. "I have a meeting. You need to go." Behind him, Vanessa leaned against the kitchen counter, her arms folded and her lips curved into a slow smile that didn't bother pretending to be polite. "You really should have seen this coming," Vanessa said lightly. "It was always going to end like this." Emily looked between them, trying to support herself to something solid. "What are you talking about? This is my home." Mark let out a short laugh. "No, it isn't." Vanessa pushed off the counter and walked closer, heels clicking with deliberate confidence. "Your name isn't on the deed anymore." Emily's breath caught at that moment. "That's not possible. Mark and I handled the paperwork," Vanessa said, tilting her head. "You signed everything. Remember? You trust too easily." Emily remembered the papers. A stack placed casually on the dining table weeks ago. Mark had kissed her forehead, told her it was routine refinancing, told her she didn't need to stress about boring details. Her stomach dropped. "And the savings?" Emily asked, even though she already knew the answer. Mark's expression didn't change. "There are no savings. As of today." The words made her feel like she has been betrayed. Emily swallowed hard. "You emptied our account?" "Our account?" He raised an eyebrow. "You quit your job, Emily. I told you everything was tied to the business. And you agreed." Vanessa smiled wider, clearly enjoying the whole thing. "You really thought someone like him would stay loyal to someone like you?" Hearing this for the second time, Emily's chest tightened in pain, but she refused to cry. Not here. Not in front of them. She bent down, picked up the suitcase, and stood slowly, her legs trembling despite her effort to stay composed. "Karma is real," she said quietly, more to herself than to them. "And it's dangerous." Mark scoffed. "Save the drama for something better." She turned and walked out without looking back. The door closed behind her with a final click. Outside, Emily stood on the front step for a moment, staring at the door as if it might open again. But of course, it didn't. She dragged her suitcase down the driveway and didn't stop walking until the house went out of sight. Not having any money on her to rent a house at the moment, she used the little money she had with her to pay for a motel room. At least, she needed to think of how she would fix this and start up all over again because her head was about splitting with things going through her head. At the motel room, Emily dropped her bag and sank onto the edge of the bed, exhaustion finally catching up with her. The silence pressed in, loud and heavy this time. She stared at the ceiling, memories replaying without permission. Mark asking her to quit her job because he wanted to take care of everything. Mark telling her she didn't need to worry about money. Mark promising she was safe. A bitter laugh escaped her throat. Safe indeed. She reached into her bag, searching for her phone, and then stopped when her fingers brushed against something unfamiliar. It was a stiff envelope, yellowed at the edges, placed between folded clothes she hadn't packed herself. Her name was written on the front in neat, looping handwriting she knew by heart. Grandpa. Emily sat up slowly and opened it. Inside was an old card. Not shiny and not modern either. The edges were kind of worn out, the surface scratched from years of being hidden away. At the back, these words were written in blue ink. Use only when you truly need it. Emily stared at it for a long moment. Her grandfather hadn't been rich. He'd lived simply, saved carefully, and believed more in dignity than excess. The idea that this card meant anything at all felt almost foolish. Still, she slipped it into her pocket. She had nothing left to lose, but she decided to check it out in the bank. On getting there, the bank was quieter than she expected when she got in. Emily stepped up to the counter and placed the card down gently. I just want to check the balance, she said. The teller picked it up, frowned slightly, and slid it into the reader. The screen froze. And then it went dark. A low alert chimed, although not loud, but sharp enough to turn heads. Another screen came up. Then another. Whispers from people around went across the bank hall. The teller's face was drained of its real color. Just a moment, ma'am. A woman in a tailored suit looked over, her expression shifting from annoyance to shock. Someone else stood up abruptly from a desk. Emily noticed how suddenly everyone seemed to be moving carefully, as if they were afraid of making the wrong sound. She followed their gazes back to the screen. And then she noticed one name glowed there, pulsing softly. Josh Hathaway. I'm Emily, she said instinctively. That was my grandfather. The room went very still. A man approached from the back, his steps quick and his posture tense. Please wait here, he said. The CEO would like to see you. Emily's heart began to pound. She had walked in hoping for enough money to buy food. But right now, it all seemed to her that she had walked into something else entirely. Emily followed the man toward the private elevator, feeling the weight of her grandfather's card heavy in her pocket, though unaware that the life she had just been thrown out of was already closing behind her for good. The elevator doors closed right behind them, and now it was just Emily inside with the man who had introduced himself only as Daniel. He pressed the top floor button, then folded his hands in front of her like someone bracing for impact. Neither of them spoke at first. Emily stared at the metal walls. Her reflection was already looking nervous. Although she tried so much to maintain some level of composure, but the confidence she'd walked in with felt distant now, like it belonged to someone else. The card in her pocket seemed heavier with every passing second. You don't need to be nervous, Daniel said finally, though his voice betrayed the same tension she felt. This doesn't happen often. What doesn't? Emily asked. He hesitated, then shook his head. I'll let Mr. Hawthorne explain. The elevator chimed softly, and the doors slid open to a floor that didn't feel like part of the same building. As the carpet was thicker and the lighting warmer, the air quieter. Daniel gestured for her to step out, and she did. They walked past glass walls and offices that looked more like private lounges than workspaces. People glanced up as she passed, and their expressions were unreadable but alert. Not curiosity but more of recognition. They stopped in front of a large wooden door. Daniel knocked once and opened it without waiting. Inside, a man stood near the window, his back turned and hands clasped behind him. Mr. Hawthorne, Daniel said. She's here. And the man turned. Jonathan Hawthorne didn't look surprised. Rather he looked prepared. Mid-50s, silver threaded through dark hair, tailored suit without a wrinkle out of place. His gaze landed on Emily sharply. Thank you, Daniel, he said. We'll take it from here. Daniel nodded and left, closing the door softly behind him. Jonathan gestured toward a chair. Please. Sit. Emily hesitated, and then obeyed. Her knees felt unsteady, and she didn't trust them to hold her for long. You said your grandfather was Josh Hathaway, Jonathan asked. Yes, Emily replied. He passed away 3 years ago. I know, he said quietly. That single sentence sent a chill through her. She had an account here? Emily asked, needing something concrete to hold on to. Jonathan nodded. He did. But not in the way you're imagining. He walked back to his desk, sat down, and folded his hands. Josh Hathaway was one of the earliest silent investors in this institution. She believed in its foundation, its mission, and for a long time, he helped shape it. Emily stared at him, waiting for the punchline that never came. That's not possible. My grandfather lived in a rented house. He reused grocery bags and he clipped coupons. Jonathan's lips curved slightly. Some people value privacy more than recognition. Emily shook her head. He never told me anything about a bank. Or investments. Or this. Because he didn't want you dragged into it, he said. Especially not then. Dragged into what? Jonathan studied her for a moment, as if weighing how much truth she could handle. Power, he said finally. And the resentment that follows it. He leaned back in his chair. Your grandfather challenged certain decisions made by the board years ago. Decisions that benefited a few at the expense of many. Emily's chest tightened. He was just a teacher. He was also very observant, Jonathan replied. And very stubborn. A knock sounded at the door. Sir. A woman stepped in, holding a tablet in her hand. Looking all confident. Her eyes landed on Emily, and then froze when she saw the card Emily had. The color drained from her face. I'm sorry, the woman said quickly. I didn't realize. Jonathan stood. This can wait. The woman nodded stiffly and left without another word. Emily watched her go. She recognized the card. Yes, Jonathan said. Anyone who's been here long enough would. He exhaled slowly. Emily, you need to understand something. Your grandfather didn't simply walk away from this bank. He was pushed. The word sounded off. Pushed how? Emily asked. Jonathan's jaw tightened. Politically. Strategically. Quietly. Emily's mind raced and memories surfaced right away. Her grandfather avoiding certain conversations. The way she'd always insisted Emily learns to read contracts carefully. The warning she'd given more than once. Don't let people decide your worth. Some people will be very unhappy that you're here, Jonathan continued. Because your existence complicates things for them. Before Emily could respond, her phone buzzed in her bag. She hesitated, and then checked it. It was Mark. Why were you at the bank today? Her fingers trembled as she locked the screen and looked up. Jonathan noticed. That's your husband. Emily said softly. Jonathan nodded. Then let me be very clear. You need to be careful who you trust. Including people in this building. What happens now? Emily asked, looking all confused. Jonathan reached into a drawer and slid a folder across the desk. Verification. Legal review. Temporary restrictions. Restrictions, she repeated after him. Yes, he said. Your grandfather's assets are complex. And contested. Contested by who? Jonathan didn't answer directly. By people who believed that everything about him ended with him. Emily stood. I didn't come here to claim anything. I just needed money to eat. I believe you, Jonathan said. But belief isn't enough to protect you. The meeting ended with more questions than answers. By the time Emily stepped back into the elevator, the warmth of the executive floor had vanished. Her phone buzzed again. Then again. Unknown number. Be careful who you trust. Her heart skipped a beat with regards to that. When she reached the lobby, the same bank that had felt polished and neutral now felt watchful. Conversations hushed as she passed, and all eyes followed her to the door. Her phone rang. Mark. She answered at once. I heard a rumor, he said, his voice smooth in that familiar way that once meant comfort. People said you were at Northvale Trust. With security. Why do you care to know? Emily asked. You're still my wife. You threw me out, she said. With nothing. There was a pause at first. Then he said, you're exaggerating all of these. She laughed sharply and humorlessly. "Tell me something, Mark. Was it Chloe?" But there was silence. Then a sigh. "It's complicated." "Say her name," Emily said. "Chloe," he admitted. "Vanessa's friend." The truth hit harder than she expected. Before she could respond, a familiar voice cut in behind her. "You shouldn't push him," Vanessa said softly. Emily turned. Vanessa stood a few feet away, having her phone in her hand, smiling. Some people don't know when to stay quiet. Emily ended the call and met her gaze. "You took everything from me," Emily said. Vanessa leaned closer. "And you still don't know how lucky you are." Emily felt like she might have been watched and maybe a target all these without even knowing. And so she took a deep beneath the fear, ready for whatever that Vanessa might be up to. Emily didn't wait for Vanessa to say anything else. She turned abruptly and walked away, forcing her steps to stay steady even as her pulse raced. The city felt different now, as if every reflection in the glass buildings was watching her back. She didn't go far before the weight of everything caught up with her. The motel clerk barely looked at her when she checked in, and then slid the key across the counter without questions. Emily got into the room, dropped her bag and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Mark. It was an unknown number. "You shouldn't have gone to the bank." Her fingers tightened around the phone. She typed a response, and then erased it. Whoever this was, they already knew too much. She lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling as her thoughts kept circling back to her grandfather. Josh had always seemed gentle, but there had been quiet steel behind it. She taught Emily how to stand her ground without raising her voice. How to listen more than she spoke. And now somehow, that quiet strength had followed Emily into a world that felt far more dangerous than she'd ever imagined. By morning, the ache in her chest had turned into something sharper and more focused. She checked her bank app out of habit, knowing what she'd see. 0. A knock sounded at the door. Emily froze and then another knock followed, firmer this time. She opened it, just enough to see the motel manager standing there with his arms crossed. "Checkout time," he said. "And there's an issue with your payment." "I told the front desk that I'd handle it today," Emily said. He shook his head. "Payment was declined. You'll need to leave." "I just need a little more time," she pleaded quietly. He sighed, clearly uninterested. Rules are rules. By the time she dragged her suitcase back outside, the sky had turned gray. She sat at the bus stop across the street, and in no time, it started raining. She tried to pull herself together not to let what was happening get to her. Her phone vibrated again. This time, it was a voicemail. She hesitated before pressing play. "Emily," Jonathan Hawthorne's voice said, lower than it had been in his office. "I wanted to make sure you're aware. The board has called an emergency session. And your claim is being challenged." Her stomach dropped. She called him back immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. The rain picked up, tapping against the shelter roof just like that. Emily pulled her coat tighter around herself with her suitcase beside her. She felt exposed. Not just homeless, but hunted. A man approached slowly from the sidewalk, stopping a few feet away. He wore a Northvale Trust badge tucked into his jacket, though he glanced around as if making sure no one was watching. "Emily Hathaway?" he asked quietly. "Yes," she replied. "My name's Arthur," he said. "I work in compliance." Her heart began to pound. "What do you want?" Arthur shifted closer to her. "I shouldn't be talking to you. But your grandfather, he didn't deserve what happened to him." He reached into his bag and pulled out a thin envelope. "This showed up on my desk this morning. No return address. Just your name." Emily stared at it. "Why give it to me?" "Because if I give it to my supervisor, it disappears," he said. "And because you're walking into something bigger than you realize." She took the envelope with trembling hands. Arthur stepped back. "Be careful who you trust," he said again, then turned and walked away. Emily waited until he was gone and out of sight before opening it. Inside was a photograph. Her grandfather stood in front of a half-finished bank building, although looking younger, and his smile was confident. On either side of her stood two men in suits. One of them she recognized instantly. That was Mark's father. Emily's breath caught. On the back of the photo, These words were written in hurried ink. They pushed me out once. Don't let them do it again. Her phone rang, startling her. It was Mark. She answered without thinking. "Where are you?" he demanded. "That's none of your business," Emily said. "You took something," he said. "I know you did." "I took my dignity," she replied. "You might want to check what you lost." "You don't know what you're dealing with," Mark snapped. "My father." He stopped himself too late. Emily closed her eyes. "Your father was involved," she said. "Wasn't he?" There was silence. "You're in danger," Mark said finally, his voice shifting. "You need to give me whatever you have before this gets worse." "For me?" she asked. "Yes, for you," he insisted. She ended the call. By the time she boarded the train heading out of the city, her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold her ticket. She sank into a window seat and stared at her reflection in the glass. She looked so exhausted. But not broken. Her phone buzzed again. This time, a message from an unknown number. "The board doesn't believe you're related to Josh Hathaway." A second message followed. "They're freezing everything." Emily leaned back, closing her eyes as the train moved forward. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew she couldn't stay at a spot with the thoughts going on right in her head. The train slowed as it approached a quieter neighborhood. Emily stepped off and walked until she found her car parked where she'd left it days ago. She climbed into the back seat and curled up, exhaustion finally taking the better side of her. Her phone buzzed one more time before she fell asleep. "You should have stayed quiet." Emily slept lightly, unaware that while she rested, the people who had erased her grandfather were already making plans to erase her too. Emily woke to the sound of her phone vibrating against the car seat. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The windows were fogged and the sky was still dim. She checked the screen. 3 missed calls. 1 voicemail. All from unknown numbers. Her throat tightened as she pressed play. "Ms. Hathaway," a male voice said, professional and clipped. "This is regarding a legal matter involving Mr. Mark Cross. Please return this call as soon as possible." She deleted the message without calling back. The second voicemail was worse. "You don't understand how exposed you are," the voice said, lower and unfamiliar. "Your grandfather made powerful enemies. And now they know you exist." Emily sat up slowly, scanning the empty street outside the car. Nothing moved except a stray cat darting between parked vehicles. She locked the car doors firmly as if that would change anything. By mid-morning, Emily washed up in a gas station restroom, changed into clean clothes, and tried to make herself look a bit comfortable. She stared at her reflection for a long moment before turning away. She needed answers. And there was only one place she could get them. There was no way she would get answers if she didn't go to find out for herself. Northvale Trust was louder than it had been the day before. Security guards stood closer together. Conversation stopped abruptly when Emily stepped inside. She approached the front desk. "I need to speak with Jonathan Hawthorne." The receptionist glanced at her screen, and then shook her head. "Mr. Hawthorne is in a board meeting." "I can wait." "You can't," the woman replied, lowering her voice. "You're not authorized on this floor anymore." Emily's stomach dropped. What does that mean? Before the receptionist could answer, 2 security guards approached. "Ms. Hathaway," one said gently, "we need you to come with us." They led her to a glass-walled conference room just off the lobby. Moments later, the screen at the end of the table came up. Jonathan appeared, seated among several other people. None of them smiled. "Emily," he began, his voice formal now. "This is an emergency session of the board." "What's happening?" she asked. "You said." "Let's be clear," a woman interrupted. "No one promised you anything." Another man leaned forward. "We have reason to believe the card you presented may have been obtained improperly." Emily felt the blood drain from her face. "That's not true. It belonged to my grandfather." "Can you prove that?" the woman asked. Jonathan adjusted his tie, not looking at her. "Until verification is complete, the board has decided to freeze all access connected to the Hathaway accounts." Freeze. The word echoed in her head. "You're saying I have nothing," Emily said quietly. "For now," Jonathan replied. The screen went dark. Emily sat there long after the guards escorted her back outside. To Emily, the city felt colder again, like it had shifted while she wasn't looking. Her phone buzzed as soon as she stepped onto the sidewalk. That was Mark's lawyer, but she didn't answer. Instead, she opened the envelope Arthur had given her and studied the photograph again. Her grandfather and Mark's father, smiling like allies. Her heart almost skipped a beat. A memory surfaced then. A dinner years ago. Mark's father was sitting at the head of the table, barely acknowledging her presence. The way he'd once said casually, "Some people are useful. Others are expendable." Emily hadn't known then how personal those words were. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text. "You think the bank is your problem. It isn't." She deleted it with her hands shaking. By the time night fell, Emily was exhausted. She parked near a small diner, ordered coffee, and sat in the corner booth pretending to read a menu she couldn't afford. Every time the door opened, her heart jumped. She checked her bank app one more time. Still zero. When she finally stepped back outside, rain had started again. She pulled her jacket tight and walked toward where she'd left her car. The spot was empty. For a moment, she just stood there, confused. Then a man across the street called out, "Tow truck came earlier. They said the owner surrendered rights." Her breath hitched at once. She crossed the street quickly. "That's not possible. I didn't surrender anything." He shrugged. "Not my call." Emily felt there was more to this. She retrieved her bags from the impound office and walked until her legs were almost shaking. She ended up at another bus stop, sitting under the lights, rain soaking everywhere. A shadow fell across her feet. She looked up to see a man standing a few steps away, holding a messenger bag. "I don't want to scare you," he said quickly. "But I think you should know. Arthur didn't come to work today." Emily's heart skipped. "What do you mean?" "They said he resigned," the man continued. "Cleaned out his desk overnight." "That's not like him," Emily whispered. The man hesitated. "Nothing about this is." He handed her a folded piece of paper. "He wanted you to have this if anything happened." Emily opened it with shaking hands. Inside, there was a single sentence. "The shadow account activates only when they deny you." Her phone buzzed again. "Unknown number. You should have listened." Emily looked up, scanning the street, suddenly certain she wasn't alone. And for the first time, fear wasn't the strongest thing she felt. It was anger. And if you're still here, if this story has pulled you in so far, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. These stories keep going because of you, and your support keeps these stories coming. And tell us where you're listening from. We love seeing how far this journey travels. Emily folded the paper carefully and slipped it into her bag, her fingers stiff from the cold and the weight of everything happening so fast, at the same time. Which includes the shadow account. Whatever her grandfather had hidden, it wasn't just money. It was a trigger. A contingency. A final move designed for the exact moment Emily was standing in now, which felt all dismissed, doubted and erased. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was an email. Subject: Notice of legal action. Mark's name was at the bottom of the screen like a threat that didn't bother disguising itself anymore. She opened it with a steady hand, forcing herself not to rush. All sorts of accusations filled the page. Emotional distress. Disruption of business operations. Unlawful possession of documents. Language designed to scare, to overwhelm, and to force her into silence. Her heart a good number of beat in a minute, but she didn't look away. At the very end of the email, one line stood out. "We advise you to return any materials taken from the marital residence immediately." Emily let out a slow breath. They were panicking. And panic always left fingerprints. She stood from the bus stop bench and walked toward the street. Her steps felt purposeful now. She didn't know exactly where she was going, but she knew she couldn't stay still. Because stillness was what they wanted, and she wouldn't give it to them. Her phone rang again. It was Mark. She answered. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice calm in a way that surprised even her. "You need to stop this," he said. "My father is furious." "Good," Emily replied. "He should be." "You don't understand," Mark snapped. "This is bigger than you." "It always was," she said. You just never thought I'd see it. There was a pause. Then his tone shifted, smoother, almost pleading. Emily, listen to me. You're tired. You're scared. Let me help you. She laughed softly. You threw me out with nothing. That wasn't supposed to happen like that, he said quickly. Vanessa pushed. Don't, Emily interrupted. You chose this. Silence stretched between them. You don't know what you're holding, Mark said finally. That account, those papers, if you activate anything, you'll burn bridges you can't rebuild. Emily closed her eyes. You already burned them. She ended the call and slipped her phone back into her pocket. Her heart kept on beating so hard, but in a steady motion. By the time she reached her car, the sky had darkened fully. She climbed into the driver's seat, hands resting on the steering wheel as she stared straight ahead. For the first time since the morning Mark had thrown her out, she wasn't thinking about survival. She was thinking about strategy. Her grandfather had planned this. Emily could feel it now, the way the pieces were lining up. The denial. The freeze. The pushback. All of it had been anticipated. She pulled out the card again, running her thumb along the worn edge. Use only when you truly need it. Emily started the engine. She didn't go back to the bank. Instead, she drove to a quiet part of the city where Northvale Trust's corporate records office was located. It wasn't flashy. No fancy floors or private elevators. Just glass, steel, and people who believed paperwork mattered more than power. She parked across the street and waited for a while. It didn't take long. Arthur's face appeared in her mind. The way he'd looked over his shoulder before handing her the envelope screamed fear. Not for himself, maybe for what he knew. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. You shouldn't be here. Emily didn't reply. Instead, she opened the envelope again and studied the handwriting on the note. Josh's writing felt firm and intentional. The shadow account activates only when they deny you. She stepped out of the car and crossed the street, rain beginning to fall again, although light but persistent. Inside, the lobby was quiet. A woman behind the desk looked up. Can I help you? I need to submit a formal request for verification under the Hathaway estate, Emily said, keeping her voice steady. The woman blinked. That requires. I know, Emily said. I have the documentation. She placed the photo, the card, and the folded note on the counter. The woman's eyes widened slightly. Please wait. Emily waited. Minutes passed. Then later wards, a man in a dark suit approached her with a tight expression. Ms. Hathaway. I'm with Internal Records. He gestured for her to follow him down a hallway lined with file rooms and servers. We don't usually see claims like this, he said. Especially not revived ones. Emily stopped walking. Revived. He hesitated, then sighed. Your grandfather filed a conditional succession clause 20 years ago. And it was sealed. What does that mean? Emily asked. It means, he said quietly, that if his ownership was ever denied without cause, control wouldn't disappear. It would transfer. To who? Emily asked, though she already knew. To you. Her breath caught off guard. The man continued, but activation requires proof of obstruction. Emily handed him her phone. The emails. The freeze notice. The board's denial. He studied them carefully, then nodded once. I'll submit this, he said. It will trigger a review. And then? Emily asked. Then, he replied, things get complicated. In no time, Emily was excused. So, she went back inside her car. She leaned against her car while her heart continued racing. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was Jonathan Hawthorne. Emily, he said when she answered. His voice sounded tensed. You activated something. I did what my grandfather prepared me to do, Emily replied. There was a pause. You need to understand, Jonathan said. Once this moves forward, there's no other way out. Emily looked up at the dark sky. There never was. He exhaled slowly. The board is meeting again. Tonight. Good, Emily said. I'll be there. When the call ended, she felt it then. Not fear. Not panic. But momentum. Emily started the car and drove back toward the heart of the city, unaware that inside that boardroom, the people who had once erased her grandfather were realizing too late that history was about to repeat itself, with consequences. The city blurred past Emily's windshield as she drove, headlights streaking through the rain. She tried so much to have her hand steady on the wheel, considering the restless thoughts she couldn't help at the moment. Hours ago, she'd been scrambling for shelter. Now she was heading straight back into the place that had tried to erase her. Northvale Trust was right ahead of her. Security was tighter now than before. Emily parked and stepped out into the rain. A security man moved to intercept her. "Ma'am, the building is closed to the public." "They are expecting me," Emily said calmly. "Tell Jonathan Hawthorne I'm here." The security hesitated, studying her face, then spoke quietly into his radio. Moments later, the doors opened. Jonathan stood just inside, with his expression drawn. "You shouldn't have come alone," he said as she stepped inside. "I'm not alone," Emily replied. "I just stopped pretending I was." He didn't argue. Instead, he gestured for her to follow him toward the elevators. The ride up felt longer this time. Neither of them spoke. Emily focused on nothing particularly but grounding herself in the moment. When the doors opened, the hallway was filled with tension. Voices were heard from behind the boardroom doors, but sounded clipped and urgent. Jonathan paused outside. "Once you walk in, there's no turning back," he said. Emily met his gaze. There never was. She pushed the doors open. The room fell silent at that moment. All eyes turned toward her. Some were startled. Some are furious. Others were calculating. Mark stood near the end of the table, with his expression darkening the moment he saw her. "What is she doing here?" he demanded. Emily ignored him and walked to the center of the room, placing her bag on the table. Jonathan cleared his throat. "Ms. Hathaway has submitted documentation activating a conditional succession clause." Murmurs went throughout the boardroom. "That clause was sealed," a man snapped. "Yes," Jonathan said. "And legally binding." Emily reached into her bag and slid the photo across the table. "My grandfather didn't walk away," she said. She was forced out. A woman leaned forward. "You can't prove that." Emily met her eyes. "You froze my access. Denied my lineage. Obstructed verification. That was the trigger." Mark laughed harshly. "This is ridiculous. You don't even understand what you're doing." Emily turned to him. "I understand you emptied our joint account and labeled personal expenses as business costs." His smile was cut short. She continued, her voice steady. "Trips. Gifts. Hotel stays. All paid for through company funds. For Chloe." A few board members exchanged looks. Jonathan stiffened. "Is that true?" Mark slammed his hand on the table. "This has nothing to do with her." "It has everything to do with her," Emily said. "You tried to bury what your father started." The room buzzed again, louder now. A man at the far end stood. "We need a vote." "Before you do," Emily said, "there's one more thing." She pulled out her phone and tapped the screen, sliding it across the table. Emails. Transaction logs. Legal notices. The paper trail they'd assumed she'd never be able to follow. Just then, silence fell. Jonathan exhaled slowly. "These are serious violations." Mark's face had gone pale. "You can't do this." "I can," Emily replied. "And I am." Security moved toward Mark as the board began arguing right away. Accusations flew. Old alliances pulled up. And just like that, the boardroom felt like it was collapsing inward. Finally, Jonathan raised his hand. "Enough. We're voting." One by one, hands rose. Remove Jonathan Hawthorne as CEO. Suspend cross-family interests pending investigation. Transfer interim control to the Hathaway successor. Emily didn't react. She simply stood there, heart pounding, as the weight of the moment settled in. The vote passed. Security escorted Mark from the room, his protests echoing down the hallway. Emily watched him go, not with triumph, but with clarity. When the room emptied, Jonathan approached her, in a low voice. "You didn't have to be so thorough." Emily looked at him. They taught me to be. He nodded. You're interim CEO now. Emily took a breath. Then we start with a full audit. Outside, reporters had begun to gather, lights flashing as Emily stepped into the hallway. But she didn't stop. She didn't smile. She only walked forward with purpose, aware that this was only the beginning. Emily stepped into the office that had once belonged to Jonathan Hawthorne and closed the door behind her. For the first time since Mark had told her to leave his house and never return, she felt something close to peace. But she also knew. This wasn't over. The office felt different once the door closed behind Emily. Not smaller. Not intimidating. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that came after a storm passed through and left everything exposed. She stood there for a long moment, hands resting on the back of the chair, breathing in slowly. Emily sat down. The chair adjusted automatically, smooth and effortless, but she didn't let herself sink into it yet. She opened her bag and took out her grandfather's card, placing it carefully on the desk, not like a trophy, but like a support. Knowing fully well that Josh Hathaway had never cared for appearances. He'd cared about outcomes. A knock came at the door. "Come in," Emily said. A woman stepped inside. She looked like she was in her early 40s, sharp eyes and straight posture. "I'm Laura Bennett, General Counsel." Emily nodded. "I want everything," she said without preamble. "Every audit. Every settlement. Every buried complaint." Laura didn't flinch. "I was hoping you'd say that." Another knock followed almost immediately. This time, a younger man entered, nervous but determined. "I'm in internal controls," he said. "Arthur trained me." Emily's chest tightened. "Where is Arthur?" The man hesitated. "HR says he resigned. But he didn't clear his personal account." Emily met his gaze. "Find him." He nodded. "Already trying." Time moved so fast after that. Documents arrived in waves. Files that should have been reviewed years ago. Complaints quietly settled. Loans approved that never should have been. Names surfaced again and again, threaded through decisions that had shaped the bank's rise. One name appeared more than most, which was Richard Cross, Mark's father. Emily leaned back in the chair, eyes closed, the weight of everything happening pressing down on her chest. Mark hadn't just married her. He'd placed himself close to her grandfather's shadow without knowing it. Or maybe he had known. Her phone buzzed. It was Vanessa. Emily stared at the name for a moment before answering. "You think you've won," Vanessa said without greeting. "But you don't belong in that world." Emily smiled faintly. "Funny. That's exactly what they said about my grandfather." "You're going to destroy everything," Vanessa snapped. "Careers. Families." Emily's voice remained calm. "They did that themselves." There was a pause. Then Vanessa's tone softened, just slightly. "Mark is shooting up in anger. I think you should talk to him." "I already did," Emily replied. He chose his side. She ended the call and set the phone down, feeling unmoved. Outside the office, voices rose again. There were reporters. Lawyers. Board members scrambling to protect themselves. The building buzzed with different noises like a hive that had just been struck. Emily stood and walked to the window. Somewhere down there, Mark was realizing that the control he thought he'd secured had never been his. Her phone buzzed again. This time, an unknown number. She answered cautiously. "You activated the account," a familiar, gravelly voice said. Emily's breath caught. "Who is this?" There was a pause. Then the person finally said, "Your grandfather trusted me." Her heart raced. "Arthur." "No," the voice said. "Someone older. Someone who stayed quiet long enough to survive." "What do you want?" Emily asked. "To warn you," he said. "They're not done. Removing Mark was easy. The board will try to negotiate." "I'm not negotiating with anyone," Emily replied. The man chuckled softly. "Good. Josh would have liked that." The line went dead after that. Emily set the phone down slowly. By morning, the headlines had spread. Analysts speculated. Commentators argued. Emily Hathaway's name trended in spaces she'd never known existed. She didn't read any of it. Instead, she met with regulators. Approved audits. Reinstated employees who'd been quietly pushed out. Arthur's name came up again and again, attached to memos flagged and ignored. Late that afternoon, Laura returned. Her expression looked serious. "We found him," she said. Emily stood. "Where?" "Hospital," Laura replied. "Exhausted and dehydrated. He didn't resign. He was escorted out." Emily's jaw tightened. "I want him protected." "It's already arranged," Laura said. "And Emily, there's something else." She slid a file across the desk. Inside was a handwritten letter. Josh's handwriting. Emily's hands trembled as she unfolded it. "If you're reading this, then they tried to erase you the way they tried to erase me. Don't be afraid of what they call power. Be afraid of silence. Speak when it costs you." Tears rolled down effortlessly from Emily's eyes, but she didn't wipe them away. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel it. The loss. The pride. The fierce, steady love her grandfather had wrapped around her even from beyond the grave. Emily folded the letter and placed it back in the folder. She looked up. "Schedule a press conference." Laura blinked. "Are you sure?" "Yes," Emily said. "I'm done letting other people tell this story." Outside, cameras flashed as Emily stepped forward later that evening. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't smile for effect. She spoke clearly. About accountability. About transparency. About restoring trust. She didn't mention Mark. She didn't mention Vanessa either. When Emily stepped back inside, she was already feeling in charge and in control of what was rightfully hers. She returned to the office and sat alone for a long moment, staring at the city again. Josh had been right. Silence was the real enemy. And Emily had no intention of being quiet ever again. The backlash didn't take long. By the next morning, Emily's inbox was flooded. Messages from investors pretending to be supportive while quietly probing for leverage. Lawyers offering friendly guidance. Old board members suddenly eager to reconnect, as if familiarity could soften accountability. She ignored most of it. Instead, she sat with Laura and the compliance team, reviewing timelines. Dates. Decisions. Patterns. What emerged wasn't a single bad actor, but a culture that had learned how to look the other way. Emily tapped a page with her finger. "This loan," she said. "Why was it approved?" Laura hesitated. It shouldn't have been. But the request came through Richard Cross's office. Mark's father again. Emily exhaled slowly. "And this settlement?" "Same channel," Laura said. "Different year. Same outcome." Emily leaned back, absorbing it. Her grandfather hadn't been pushed out because he was difficult. She'd been pushed out because he was inconvenient. Her phone buzzed. A text from Mark. "We need to talk. Please." She stared at it for a long moment, then replied. "No." The response came instantly. "You don't understand what my father is capable of." Emily typed back. "Neither did you." She put the phone face down. That afternoon, Arthur was brought in quietly through a side entrance. He looked thinner and tired, but his eyes were clear when he saw her. "I'm sorry," he said before she could speak. "I tried to get the information out sooner." Emily shook her head. "You did enough. More than enough." Arthur hesitated. "They knew about the clause. They just never thought you'd trigger it." "Why?" Emily asked. Arthur smiled faintly. "Because they underestimated Josh Hathaway. And then they underestimated you." Emily felt a tightness in her throat but kept her voice steady. "I'm reinstating you. With protection." Arthur nodded. "Thank you." As he left, Laura closed the door behind him. "You should know," she said carefully, "the Cross family has retained outside counsel. They're pushing for mediation." Emily laughed softly. "Of course they are." That evening, Emily returned to the motel parking lot where she'd slept in her car days earlier. She sat behind the wheel for a moment, remembering how small and invisible she'd felt then. She started the engine and drove away. At the bank, another board meeting took place. This time, Emily sat at the head of the table. "We're voting on policy reforms," she said calmly. "Independent oversight. Transparent reporting. No exceptions. A man cleared his throat. This will cost us. Emily met his gaze. Integrity usually does. One by one, the votes passed. Later that night, almost everyone was all gone. Emily remained in her office. She opened her laptop and pulled up a single file marked Hathaway Trust. Inside were the last notes her grandfather had left, sealed behind layers of legal language. With all she saw, she understood that her grandfather hadn't wanted revenge. He'd wanted balance. Emily closed the file and leaned back, although feeling exhausted but clear-headed. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. You should be careful tonight. Emily's spine stiffened. Who is this? But there was a pause. Someone who knows the Cross family won't stop. Emily glanced toward the office door, then the window. They already tried. There was another pause. Then, that was just pressure. This will be personal. The line went dead instantly. Emily stood and walked to the window, scanning the street below. Nothing actually looked out of place, just the usual activities. But she didn't dismiss the warning. She called Laura. I want security doubled, she said. And I want everything recorded. Laura didn't ask questions but replied immediately. Done. By morning, the press had shifted tone. No longer speculative. Now curious. Investigative. The story wasn't about scandal anymore. It was about exposure. Mark's name appeared in an article tied to misappropriated funds. Chloe's name followed shortly after. Vanessa's involvement surfaced through emails she'd assumed were deleted. Emily didn't smile when she read it. She felt something quieter. Or let's say, mission accomplished. Her phone rang mid-morning. That was Mark again. She answered this time. You've destroyed us, he said hoarsely. You destroyed yourself, Emily replied. You don't have to keep going, he said. We can settle this. Emily looked at the city outside her window. You threw me out with nothing. You taught me exactly how far you were willing to go. I was wrong, Mark said. I admit it. She closed her eyes briefly. So was I. I thought you were my home, but maybe I overestimated you. The silence between them stretched. Then she ended the call. That afternoon, Emily walked through the bank lobby without anyone whispering. People nodded. Some smiled. Others looked relieved. She paused near the front desk where it had all begun. The teller recognized her and smiled nervously. You changed things, he said. Emily shook her head. My grandfather did. I just finished it. If this story has kept you listening, if you felt every turn with Emily, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. And tell us where you're watching from. Your presence here matters more than you know. Emily stepped outside into the sunlight, and for the first time in a long while, she wasn't bracing for impact. She was standing on solid ground. The first subpoena arrived before noon. Emily didn't flinch when Laura placed it on her desk. She had been expecting it. The Cross family had never known when to stop digging, even when the ground beneath them was already unstable. They're claiming defamation, Laura said. And breach of fiduciary duty. Emily leaned back, folding her hands. On what grounds? On the grounds that accountability feels unfair when you're not used to it, Laura replied evenly. Emily let out a small smile. Then we proceed. By the end of the week, the investigation widened. Regulatory agencies requested interviews. Former employees came forward, some quietly, some with years of resentment finally finding air. Patterns became stories. And in turn, stories became evidence. Richard Cross was called in for questioning. That was when Mark showed up unannounced. He waited in the lobby, pacing like a man who had run out of exits. When Emily walked past the glass wall, he adjusted immediately. We need to talk, he said as security stepped aside just enough for him to speak. Emily stopped, meeting his eyes without emotion. You have 5 minutes. He swallowed. My father says this has gone too far. Emily nodded. I agree. But then it went too far years ago. You don't understand what he did to protect us, Mark said desperately. To protect the company. To protect himself, Emily corrected. Mark's voice cracked. He'll go to prison. Emily's gaze softened, Not with sympathy, but with truth. Then he'll finally be held where he can't hurt anyone else. "You're enjoying this," Mark accused weakly. Emily shook her head. "No. I'm ending it." Security stepped closer. Mark looked around, then back at her. "You could stop it," he whispered. She leaned in just enough for him to hear. "You should have thought of that before you told me to leave your house." She walked away without looking back. That afternoon, Arthur stood in Emily's doorway and held a folder under his arm. "We found something," he said. Inside the folder were archived communications, internal warnings, signed approvals that should never have existed. Arthur pointed to a line. "This is the vote that forced Josh Hathaway out." Emily read it carefully. Names circled. One signature stood out. Jonathan Hawthorne. Her chest stopped for a beat. She closed the folder slowly and stared at the desk. Jonathan had tried to help her. Had warned her. Had also benefited from the silence. So she called him. He answered on the second ring. "Emily." "I need you to come in," she said. "Now." When he arrived, she didn't waste time. She slid the folder across the desk. Jonathan's face drained off as he read. He closed his eyes briefly. "You knew," Emily said quietly. "I knew enough to be afraid," he replied. "And I stayed." Emily nodded. So did everyone else. He met her gaze. "Do what you need to do." "I am," she said. "You're resigning." He didn't argue. When he left, Emily felt something settle inside her. Not relief, but it was more of closure. That night, she went back to her car, not to sleep, but to sit. To remember who she'd been when this began. The woman who was once standing on a sidewalk with a suitcase and nowhere to go. Her phone buzzed one last time that evening. Unknown number. "It's done. He's cooperating." Emily didn't reply. By morning, the news broke. Richard Cross arrested pending trial. Mark's accounts frozen. Vanessa named as co-conspirator in document falsification. Emily watched it unfold on screens in the lobby, employees gathering quietly in eyes wide. She didn't give a speech as she didn't need to. Later that day, Laura handed her a final document. "Formal appointment," she said. "And this is permanent." Emily signed it without hesitation. That evening, she returned to the office long after everyone had gone. She opened the top drawer of her desk and took out Josh's letter one more time. "Power isn't about money. It's about knowing who you are when they try to take everything from you." Emily folded it carefully and placed it back. She stood, turned off the lights, and looked out at the city one last time that night. She hadn't just won a throne, but she'd reclaimed herself. Because the truth is that the world changes when people stop letting others decide their worth. Everyone had almost gone when Emily finally shut down her computer and stood from the desk. For the first time in days, her body felt heavy, not with fear, but with the exhaustion that came after surviving something that should have broken her. She gathered her bag and paused at the door, glancing once more at the office. It still didn't feel like hers in the way Mark's house never truly had. This space wasn't about possession, but it was about responsibility. She locked the door and walked down the quiet hallway, her footsteps echoing softly right behind her. When she reached the lobby, the security guard nodded at her with a warm smile that hadn't been there before. "Good night, Ms. Hathaway." Emily smiled faintly. "Good night." She walked to her car and sat behind the wheel for a moment without starting the engine, letting the silence settle around her. Her phone buzzed. It was Arthur. "They've finalized the protections. I wanted you to know, thank you. For not letting them make you disappear." Emily typed back. "They tried once. And so that was enough." She set the phone down and leaned her head back against the seat, closing her eyes. Thoughts she had forced herself to let go came again. Which were, the suitcase sliding across the floor. Vanessa's smile. Mark's voice telling her to leave. The motel bed. The bus stop. The rain. And then her grandfather's handwriting. "Use only when you truly need it." Emily realized something then. The card hadn't really been about money. It had been about timing. About trusting herself enough to step forward when everything told her to shrink. She started the engine and drove. Not back to the motel. Not back to the house that had never belonged to her. She drove to a small neighborhood on the edge of the quiet city. A place Josh Hathaway had once loved. Emily parked and walked down the street, stopping in front of the house where she'd spent summers as a child. Although the house belonged to someone else. But the sidewalk still felt like home. Emily sat on the curb for a moment, staring at the front steps, remembering her grandfather's laugh. The way he'd hum while cuddling her to sleep. The way he'd say, "People will try to tell you who you are. Listen politely. Then decide for yourself." "I decided," Emily whispered. Her phone buzzed again. It was Mark. She almost ignored it. But when the call came for the second time, she decided to answer. "You won," he said quietly. There was no anger left. Just defeat. Emily didn't respond. "I don't know how to live with this," he continued. "Everything is gone." Emily closed her eyes. "You'll figure it out," she said gently. "You always told me that." He let out a shaky breath. "I was wrong about you." "Yes," Emily said. "You were." She ended the call and didn't feel the need to look back. By the end of the week, Northvale Trust announced sweeping reforms. Independent oversight. Restitution funds. Public accountability. The headlines were sharp, then softened, but then moved on, as headlines always did. Emily stayed. She sat with employees who had been afraid to speak. She listened more than she talked. She made changes slowly, deliberately, the way her grandfather would have. Arthur returned to his desk. Laura stopped sleeping with her phone under her pillow. People breathed easier. One afternoon, Emily found herself standing again at the teller counter where it had all begun. The same teller looked up and smiled, more confident now. "Everything okay?" he asked. Emily nodded. "Sure. Very okay." She stepped outside into the sunlight, feeling some high level of freedom that demanded applause. The type that came from knowing exactly who you were, and refusing to let anyone tell you otherwise. That night, Emily returned to her apartment. She placed her grandfather's card carefully in a drawer, where it should be. And she could boldly depict something from everything that played out so fast in the space of a few weeks. When people strip you of everything, they expect you to stay small. But the moment you decide your worth isn't negotiable, the world has no choice but to adjust. If this story moved you, if it kept you listening until the very end, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us where you're watching from. Your support is what keeps these stories alive. And remember this. What was meant to break you might just be the thing that reveals who you really are.